Very good afternoon to all of you. Welcome to the Karma Summit. Hope you are doing well and staying safe in these unprecedented times. I'm Arnav Kapoor, and I lead the philanthropic partnerships portfolio for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in India and South Asia. I'm also part of our core team, which is anchoring our work for the COVID response in India and South Asia. Thanks a lot for joining this session today. The session is titled COVID-19, a necessary wake-up call or a healthcare catastrophe at the Karma Summit. We have with us today very senior leaders who will share perspectives from their unique vantage point. We are joined by Ransom D'Souza. He's the Vice President for Communications and Government Affairs at GlaxoSmithKline. We have with us Sakina Baker. She leads the CSR at Philips. And we have Svetlana Pinto, who is the country head for communication and CSR at Novartis India. As you are aware, the present world continues to struggle to add new dimensions to the healthcare system ever since the coronavirus has put us in a situation we never faced before. This is our wake-up call to future-proof healthcare systems for a post-COVID world. To this end, the aim of the panel discussion will be primarily twofold. First, to discuss the current scenario of the pandemic and look at opportune and impactful solutions that were adopted to ameliorate the crisis. And secondly, explore strategies and actions to build resilient communities and high-performing healthcare systems to effectively ward off a future catastrophe. With that context and objective, Ransom, let me come to you first. What is your opinion on the India's healthcare system when compared to some of the other developing countries, and what are the biggest challenges of the healthcare system? Over to you, Ransom.
Yeah, thank you, Arnav. So before I actually comment, I'd like to say that these are my personal views, not necessarily the views of the company that I work for, GSK Pharmaceuticals. So when you say healthcare, healthcare is a fairly wide subject. I mean, as a country of 1.3 billion population, the next immediate comparator that comes to mind is China. And for those of you who have had the opportunity to visit China, you would see that the entire healthcare system in China for their 1.3 billion plus population is a public is kind of delivered through the public health system. India actually, 66% of India's population is from the rural population. So, but if you look at the healthcare infrastructure, that is exactly the reverse. You'll find 70 to 80% of entire healthcare infrastructure is not in the rural villages. And it is in cities and probably at the district level. So I think to my mind, that is the first anomaly that happens. And if at all that you ever visit, a rural hospital setup, the first thing that you amazes you is how do people operate with such bare minimal infrastructure? So we have projects in UP. Or for example in Rajasthan, where you have maternal mortality at probably the highest, and you see the kind of sterile environment, or you see the kind of, so there is one set of rural population which is vastly different, and there is the other set which is the public health setup, but in cities. So for example, the best public health setup in cities is actually in Maharashtra, or for example if you look at the south. So India is basically two sets of extremes. One is you'll find the so-called cities or states in the south, the four clusters. They are far ahead of the game when it comes to public healthcare infrastructure versus the northern cluster. Now, that has also got to do with education. It's also got to do with per capita. So there are a host of pieces. So if you're looking at India's per capita at 2,500, US dollars of the GDP, you will find that some states like Kerala have a GDP per capita GDP of 5,000. Now, if you look at Bihar's per capita GDP is of 600. Now, if you actually build that into the infrastructure and the accountability of infrastructure. So I would like to kind of look at it from two distinct modes. One is the rural setup, where the emphasis should rather be, because that's where 66% of the population, but and the other last part is, all this is basically healthcare today is delivered by the private sector. If you look at the delivery in cities, a large part of that is to this. So there are various pieces that one needs to straddle and look at, but I think there is also an opportunity and an inherent possibility of how we can leapfrog, given the possibilities of digital, etc., which I will touch upon. So I'll stop there and hand it over to Sakina.
Arnav, do you want me to take up this question?
Yeah, it'd be great to get your perspective, on the same question, right? From what, in your opinion, India's public healthcare system, when you look at other developing countries, what do you see as the biggest challenges?
Just to continue with what Ransom was saying, and I completely agree with him, the divide is too great, and the gap is widening with every time, every year. But I think with the recent developments that have happened post-COVID, of focusing more on the primary healthcare so that the secondary and tertiary healthcare are deburdened, is very important that we should keep a note on. We do have our challenges in terms of awareness. If we had a lot of awareness in terms of preventive healthcare, we would be able to deburden healthcare issues at the primary healthcare level itself. But unfortunately, that is not very prevalent, at least in rural and remote areas. We have access issues, we have quality issues, human resource issues. And they also are coupled by affordability, because a lot of people are not able to afford healthcare in private places, but they still have to go. They have no choice left with them, considering the quality of care that they receive. And also accountability. What is the accountability that we put in, not only in the government, but people as such? What is the accountability towards their own healthcare? Are they really concerned about the healthcare, or just they just ignore them and not seek care when it is required? So that it lies with the government as well as the people itself. Now, if you look at it from the perspective of what we can do, we can leverage on what the government has recently announced. Post-COVID, they announced too much of investment and focus into primary health systems. If that is something that we all can look at, all the sectors can look at, not only the corporate sector, but the private sector, but the government as well, join hands, collaborate, and see how we can implement that in the best spirit. It are not just on the books, it has to be implemented in the spirit. And also the National Digital Health Mission, which was announced, I think that's a great opportunity for us to learn from COVID, because all of us, not even a single person didn't learn from it. You can see how everyone, initial shock of the COVID and what it brought into our lives, we kind of shook ourselves and then got on our feet and started working on it. And I think that's a challenge not only for India, but other developing countries as well. India has more advantage in terms of the programs that have been set up by the government. And I think a lot of corporates should get into those and collaborate with those programs with the government, so that we are able to reach out to the larger audience. We're able to reach out and try to deburden a lot of the health systems in the country. Focus definitely should be primary healthcare, because majority of our population is looking at that as the first step towards seeking healthcare. So I think I completely agree with Ransom on the gap that is, and the opportunities that we can get from those gaps that are presented at the moment, and we face that at the moment.
Thanks, Sakina. I think Ransom and you mentioned primarily two areas, right? One is on the the problem set and the context, and the second on the opportunity. So the problem set primarily the divide between rural and urban, the public and private, and the access, availability, affordability, and accountability issues. But you also touched upon, the opportunities on digital side through NDHM and the primary healthcare focus. So just kind of building on that, Ransom, please come back to you to dig a little deeper. Given you mentioned, this, the rural-urban divide, the lack of infrastructure, trained staff compared to China and other countries, how do you think it, really affected the pandemic situation, right? How did it exacerbate, the pandemic situation? And if you could, look at both perspectives, the rural and the urban side also.
Yeah, no, I think sitting in our comfortable office environment is a very different world. But one look or a walk in a public hospital, whether in a city like Mumbai, leave alone a far-flung place in Rajasthan or in Bihar or in UP where we actually go. So if you kind of go there, there is this quote that comes to mind: you don't win because of better tools, you win because people step up. I mean, I have tremendous admiration for people today in the public healthcare setup. I always have the other slogan I tell my daughters is that whenever you feel high, please walk into a public hospital and see the trials and tribulations, whether it's people tripping over each other, lying there, etc., etc. So I really believe that we have, you don't win because you have better tools, because that is the mistaken norm that happens. Yes, it's more efficient, and that's a separate story. But we have been winning because people have clearly stepped up. Now, of course, there is a whole set of things that what one can do further to, make sure that that momentum is there, protective gear. I mean, the kind of infrastructure that we provide, and you see when you talk to, some of my immediate family members are also, healthcare practitioners. And when you kind of come and you see and talk to them, whether it's the nurse or the doctor, and you say, oh my goodness, you're actually wearing a plastic kit the whole day. It's not a PPE kit, which is approved, but you're actually operating on patients, and there are people all over. So firstly, I have tremendous admiration for all of that. The other bit is, I think there is this center-state divide, and I think there is this bit of each state wanting to do this federal, one-upmanship. And I think that is something that is a bit of a worrisome, piece. So it's not so much what we can do. I think it's the bit that sometimes the political state doesn't want the actual picture probably to be portrayed. And therefore, there is a bit of lackadaisical approach. So, for example, in Mumbai, when the entire COVID pandemic broke out, there was so much of intensity. Everybody actually pulled the rubber band. There's a rubber band concept, to pull the rubber band to the fullest, and we're doing it. Now, as the pandemic actually started opening, everybody went back to doing this. So, you heard your neighbor being of COVID. Oh, okay, nothing happens. And, the guy who would come with an ambulance, etc., was also very, very casual. Earlier, it would be the entire area cordoned off, a building would have been cordoned off. Having said that, I think this is not the last of all the kind of pandemics that we have faced. If you go back in time, and I was fortunate to be with GlaxoSmithKline, it was called Glaxo at that point in time, when the entire HIV/AIDS pandemic actually happened. And Maharashtra and the southern states were predominantly the front red dots. I mean, we have examples in HIV, you have examples in TB, where these states, in whatever infrastructure, actually did their best. And today, it is a disease that you can live with. So it's not something that, was a taboo. So, for example, if it's maternal mortality of, HIV, mothers giving childbirth, the child is born free. So I think if you go back in time and see what are the steps that were taken, also possibly look at some states or some countries, for example, where there is a bit of cultural nuance. So, for example, if you look at Taiwan, right, or certain countries where, because of the SARS, the earlier, pandemic that they faced, there was a culture of wearing masks. Mm-hmm. There was a preparedness in terms of alarm systems. There was a full and central command that is kind of doing the pieces. I think, to my mind, and this has been a challenge with healthcare in the country, that one data set does not talk to the other data set. So, like I mentioned to you, the government, each government hospital has its own data set, leave alone the accuracy of the data sets. So if you ever go to a public hospital and try and see how the health management information system is maintained, God help you to simple decipher the language and then input it into the system. Now, that is just one standalone hospital. This one standalone hospital talking to another next door hospital in a state, there is no correlation of that data. And please remember that science is based on data only when you have a trend line. And I think those are the gaps. We have to first focus on the big cities and make sure that with digital, today we have 1 billion plus people with mobile phones. We have 600 million people who have access to internet. So from a government side is make that digital infrastructure. It is all possible because you have Aadhaar enabled system. Now you have challenges with the public, the privacy challenges. But to my mind, if you have this data in a controlled manner, I think half of your battle is won, because then you don't need to carry any records. Today, you find that your driving license can be transferred onto your phone. I can only, whenever a police stops me, I show him my license and it's digitally valid proof. That should be the end game in terms of how our infrastructure, and we should use this opportunity to gradually move towards a digital architecture so that no matter where I am, whichever state I am, whether I am falling under Ayushman Bharat or I am part of a different healthcare insurance setup, I have all my records maintained. This data is then analyzed and looking at a trend line and is not controlled by one particular state. It is all there forever. There is this fast saying that, the pandemic has shown the number of deaths and, the recording of deaths in terms of, how many are dying out of COVID. But if you go back in past and see the number of deaths, only 70% had the actual cause of death being the real cause in India. So you have this as a major issue. To my mind, that is something that use the digital infrastructure. It is extremely possible with the Aadhaar enabled system. And therefore, once you have that data can then be used to incentivize and create a better infrastructure, not just for the healthcare setups, but also as a replicable model. Because today, a doctor in a rural setup in UP, he's not incentivized to do something good, and there is no cost of inaction, right? So he keeps doing that and doing the same thing over and over again. If he does it some differently, there's no incentive. So with digital, can you incentivize him? At the same time, if he doesn't do it well or is not up to speed with the medical literature, then there should be a cost of inaction. And all this can actually be done like a report card and then kind of manage. So there are possibilities. I'm very optimistic, and I think with the fact that we are in the digital space. I mean, America still does counting of votes, and we are actually going to electronic voting. So I believe personally that there is an opportunity for us to leapfrog in healthcare. We should not just simply emulate. And to my mind, from chemistry to biologics to health tech, I think that is the, so you can actually jump from a chemistry-based delivery of healthcare to a preventive health tech kind of a setup where you preventively know what is going to happen to you. For example, we have tied up with, CRISPR, and we are looking at how your genetic makeup can show you a predisposition to a possible disease that is likely to do in the future. Now, that is where the future is, all this at the palm of your hand. Once you have that, you know that there is a certain set of diseases that you're predisposed to, you can actually target. So there is enormous possibility. And I think India will show, what we are truly made of, given the fact that we operate with so much of minimal infrastructure.
No, thanks, Ransom. I think, you covered a range of, ideas, and of course, I think the digitization phenomena is the buzzword, and you are seeing that across sectors and truly in healthcare also. You're seeing several telehealth solutions, e-pharmacies also playing a critical role in the COVID. But just before we move forward and, try to understand how did companies and, other stakeholders react? We initially also spoke about the rural and urban divide, right? Like what we've seen with COVID, it's, it doesn't leave anyone behind, right? It's affected urban probably more than the rural areas. So just to get that perspective, Sakina, just coming back to you when you mentioned the challenges, do you think that the social, economic, demographic challenges kind of increased the burden on the healthcare system in India?
Yeah, I think there are enough evidences on studies and research done that have proven that the social status of an individual does impact the health outcomes of that person or his family or a particular location. And also that people from the lower socioeconomic strata are likely to have worse self-reported, at least health-related outcomes. So I think it would be wrong for us to say that any disaster that hits a particular section more than anyone else, like a pandemic, like COVID. But I would say that if you have access to good healthcare systems, you have access to some financial stability or insurance, you will be able to provide that. But unfortunately, in India, when you compare it with an Indian scenario, you may have a lot of schemes, services, government opportunities provided in terms of healthcare and also in terms of insurance, but people are not aware of it. People are not aware how to go, where to go and do it, especially people from the lower economic status. So the moment you look at the change in socioeconomics of a person, or you also look at change in the demography of a person, of a location, you see healthcare burden increasing. Why it is increasing? Because we have more health issues coming into effect. We never thought of COVID, but COVID did come. It did impact a lot of people who had to really shell out of pocket expenses just to take care of their health. And it hit the rural population more. If you the large hordes of migrants who went back to their locations, we're not very sure how they got themselves treated. We're not very sure how they even diagnosed themselves, whether they had COVID or any other underlying diseases. So I think socioeconomic status is very important in terms of looking at the burden healthcare system. But I think it's very important also for us to look at the data that is provided. I completely agree with Ransom on the part of having access to data, which will give us the opportunity to assess, to look at why are we looking at the demographic changes, or what are the kind of demographic changes that would impact a certain healthcare situation. I can give you an example of, say, non-communicable diseases, which are kind of hitting us left, right, and center. We may not have woken up to it, but it is there. We are facing diabetes, we are facing cancer issues, we are facing a lot of non-communicable diseases that we may not have focused too much on. But it is not that it is hitting only people in the urban centers, in the rural centers as well. But maybe people in the periphery don't even know that they have such underlying life or health-related issues. So it's very important for us to keep a note of the changes and what has been the interventions done at the healthcare perspective, and what are the things that would change it. More so because of COVID. COVID has really opened eyes for a lot of people to look at what are the healthcare issues that are going to hit a particular socioeconomic strata, people from that strata, and what are the things that we should pre-plan to make sure that they have access to those. So no doubt, yes, socioeconomic status of a person is very much relevant to what healthcare is provided to that demographic change or that socioeconomic status of that particular person.
Thanks, Sakina. We've heard about the health systems issues in India, and of course the various challenges, and some of the interventions and opportunities which both you and Ransom outlined. But I do want to bring in Svetlana also into the discussion. So it would be great to understand, Svetlana, from your perspective, what role was played and actually is being played by companies, by NGOs and other international donor organizations in fighting the pandemic, right? In light of all of these challenges, in light of the state, center, the federal structures, and also in light of the twin burden that India kind of also faces.
Thanks, Arnav. And of course, I echo everything that Ransom and Sakina have already said. And having said that, I think we must recognize that India has its own unique set of challenges, okay? Some of which have been enumerated by both of them. But one must remember the high population density that we have in our cities, and of course, the creaking health infrastructure. Having said that, I think we must acknowledge that we've been faring reasonably well, and we must support the authorities in doing what is right. So whether it is us as organizations, but I think more than that, us as individuals need to do that. And if you look at the different roles that organizations played, be it corporates, be it nonprofits or international donor organizations, I think initially, perhaps it was a bit chaotic, simply because, this is an unprecedented situation, and I don't think that any of us has ever had experience in dealing with a pandemic of this magnitude. And so, for sure, it was a bit chaotic initially, but I think soon everything fell into place, and it was like you fell into the groove and things started moving. Because one must remember that while for sure we are fighting a pandemic, people are suffering from other diseases and they need treatment. And so for companies like ours, it had to make sure that people get access to their medication. Keep the supply chain rolling, keep the manufacturing going on. And I would like to acknowledge that the government did play a very supportive role. I know that we as Novartis, definitely, every time we reached out, for support, we got that to make sure that our manufacturing continued, that our supply chain was not impacted. So companies played that role. The government played its role. And nonprofits, for sure, if you look at, any disaster, man-made or otherwise, a natural disaster or, health issues, the nonprofits have always been very, very quick to respond to these situations. And together with corporates, they played a very important role in making sure that the wheels were turning, in making sure that, supplies needed where they needed to reach. And here I'm not talking necessarily of medical supplies, but things like initially, there was the need for PPE kits, masks, hand sanitizers, disinfectants, etc. And just to make sure that all those reached, and of course, international donors made sure that middle and low-income countries gets completely ignored. So I think eventually all players came together.
Great. No, I think, it's everyone, needs to come together in scenarios like this for it to have, for us to respond to the pandemic. So, Sakina, what was your role as a corporate in bringing agility in response to this disaster, right? Like, how was it complementary to the government's efforts in addressing the needs?
I think we were no different in our initial reaction. It hit us as bad as it hit anyone else. So of it, we were at loss because we couldn't operate on field. We had to stop all functions amidst the lockdown. Now, the best thing that happened that I think was beautifully managed, a lot of corporates who were not even spending CSR money on healthcare, they all started coming together and started focusing on healthcare. I know personally a lot of corporates that we talk to may not be working on, they may be working on health, education or environment or something. Everybody kind of gotten together into the whole scenario, looked at what is the best way for them to support it. And I think Philips was no different from the rest of it, because with Philips being in healthcare, we were anyways a part of the healthcare system. We were anyways supporting a lot of social development initiatives on healthcare. So for us, it was given that we have to do something. We initiated the whole process globally through Philips Foundation, which is our philanthropic arm based out of Amsterdam, and we are almost in every country with the social development approaches, starting with China. And I think in India also, Philips India and Philips Foundation together worked on multiple layers. So what we did is we started initially, because we couldn't operate through our NGO partners, we couldn't operate in the field. So we started with the government. So we started supporting the COVID fund of the government, state governments, and also the national central government. But we gradually picked up the pieces and actually started looking at what are the best ways that we can operate in the field. We started looking at opportunities, permissions where we could operate in the field. We reworked our plans in the project that we're doing. We were anyways doing healthcare. We just added the component of COVID-19 into it, more on awareness, more on making sure that people take care of what is supposed to be the proper guideline in order to not get contacted of COVID-19. So I think because all of our activities are community-based, it helped. It helped because we're already there in the community. It was just that we had to revise a little bit of our plan, make sure that we embed the systems with the current requirement, what was COVID, besides doing whatever we were doing in the field. And I think that gelled well. It took time. It took us at least 3 months for us to actually go back into the field and start putting those actions, putting those plans into action. But in terms of what we did everything in collaboration with the government. We had government as a participant in whatever changes that we did, whether we were doing on childhood pneumonia or we're doing on preventive healthcare. Everything was coordinated through the local government so that we know that this is what is approved by the government. This is how it's going to take care of things on ground under their knowledge. So it worked very well, and it's still continuing at that level.
Got it. Yeah, no, I think both of you mentioned that it was very complementary to the government and in alignment with the community's needs. That's kind of the trinity which you need, like government, corporates, and foundations and communities kind of working together in unison. Coming back to you, Svetlana, how did you identify your stakeholders' need, and how did you engage your employees as part of the COVID relief and the rehabilitation activities?
I think when we looked at the pandemic, we could identify, let's say, 5 key stakeholders: the medical profession, the patient, most important for us, the patient, our employees, our C&F agents, and the government. Okay, these 5, I think, were kind of really key stakeholders for us. And I think we had to look at addressing all of these in cohesion, simply because we live in an interdependent world. And so to make sure that, for example, those of our employees who needed to be on site, could be on site, let's say our labs, our manufacturing sites. So lockdown, no lockdown, they had to be on site, and, to make sure that the wheels were turning. We had to make sure that our CNF agents were operating, simply because medicines needed to reach where they needed to reach. And our own employees, besides the ones who had to be on site, the others also have key roles to play, and to make sure that things worked and moved seamlessly for them. And in all of this, I think we made sure, for example, that the connect with the doctors continued through our field force. We also used this time for our own employees to increase their learning repertoire, to widen their learning repertoire. And I'm proud to share that globally, Novartis, extended Coursera to not only employees, but to employees' family members. And you could gift it to a friend as well. So we did that at a global level. We supported Khan Academy at a global level with a donation to make sure that they could reach out to more and more children. And so keep our own employees engaged as well. And coming back to how did we engage our employees in COVID-19 relief? So initially, there was for sure a resistance from the organization to let people do physical volunteering, simply because of the challenges related to the pandemic. Besides which, we needed to make sure that the organization operated, because being an essential service, so to say, even more so in the pandemic, we couldn't have a situation where our employees were out there volunteering and were not able to do their real job, let's say. So at the same time, we wanted to make sure that they felt engaged. And so we ran virtual volunteering programs. Plus, what we did was we did an employee contribution, besides all that we did through our global funding, through our local CSR funding. And there we did engage with them, for example, to put together kits. So, there were associates who came in on site, put together kits, which are then donated. And that's how we could engage with them in COVID-19 relief in maybe not such a direct way. But I think people recognized that this was possible. Having said that, we did allow associates the opportunity to take time off, and we gave them additional time off where they could then take time off to do physical volunteering if they still felt so strongly about that. But I think eventually we had a very engaged lot.
Well, yeah, I think it's, times of pandemic, it's also important to make sure the employees are engaged, and, COVID, you need everyone to come together to help, so, in this pandemic times. So just kind of building on that and just staying with you, from the implementation of the solution set, right? Like there has been different kind of solutions which have been looked at, right? Urgent and immediate needs on meal distribution, PPEs, which Sakina also mentioned. And there have been, timely solutions and involving, different sects, like the women's group, were involved in, skewing of masks. And, we've also seen behavioral and awareness solutions. So, what kind of solutions did you adopt from a Novartis perspective, or was it like some combination of all of these?
So I think you must remember that this is an evolving situation, okay? So, we all wish the pandemic would end, yeah, but it is an evolving situation. So, of course, there were some things which were kind of immediate that you did because that was the need of the hour. At a global level, Novartis created a global COVID-19 fund of some $20 million, which countries could ask for. They could request for a part of this fund to meet certain needs. We had our own local CSR funds, which we could use. We had the employee contribution as well, which went into this funding. And we worked with different nonprofits. Our focus areas were primarily in the states of Telangana and Maharashtra, simply because that's where we have our largest footprint. And we did get requests from different parts of the country, but we had to recognize that there is only so much that you can do because of, funds are finite, and we wish they would be infinite, but they're not. And so we had to take cognizance of that. And immediately what we did was, we made sure that we funded things like, as I mentioned earlier, things like PPE kits and, N95 masks, 3-ply masks, disinfectants for hospital settings, then hand sanitizers, inflatable beds for the army we did, because they were involved in relief work in Telangana, for the police force, thermal guns, pulse oximeters, that kind of thing. We also did, contribute towards upgrading some of the health infrastructure, which we hope will be there for the long term. So to that extent, it was a mix of both immediate and some things which were for the long term. But as I mentioned earlier, this is an evolving situation. It's not like everything has come to a standstill, but we will do more as and when we see what can be done and what will have the largest impact in the long term.
Coming back to your Ransom, let's kind of building on that. You mentioned before that you were involved, in various efforts in UP. You mentioned the CRISPR solution, and you also talked about the digitization. So, how do you think all of these solutions, going forward, will play a complementary role in the public healthcare system?
Yeah, no, I think the first part is to make sure that the way we structured our entire piece was employee health and well-being, business continuity, and contribution to the community. So we anchored all our initiatives on these 3 pillars. And from the contribution to the community, we actually picked and chose initiatives like, for example, what Svetlana mentioned. We predominantly did it for 2 states. One is for Maharashtra, because this is where we have our factory and also our headquarters, and also we had our a request from the central government. So you must understand that when the pandemic broke out, the first one, the drug that was most commonly sought after was paracetamol. And, as GSK really manufactures 2 big brands in the paracetamol category, one is Crocin and Calpol. And the government first immediately, started writing to us. In the 3 months, believe you me, we were classified as essential industry. So we had to continue to manufacture, but at the same time, the ancillary, the RMPM, the raw material or the product material, those were not classified as essential. So we needed to make sure if that was actually managed, then you would find that the raw material guy, if he had to supply it, there were some interstate issues. So all of these were kind of, pieces that were coming through in the initial part of it. But we essentially said, let us do what we can immediately contribute to the neighboring community. And that's what we did as an overall piece. Going forward, the government was also looking at how we could support, for example, the paracetamol. Because when you look at manufacturing of pharmaceuticals, you have various, key starting materials, and you have APIs, which is really the raw material which gets into it. So India is one of the largest API manufacturers for paracetamol. So pieces like that. So we were in constant dialogue with the government to make sure that they understand that all the manufacturing will remain in the country and it will be made available. So they were actually looking at raw material that we had, the finished material that we had, and also the supply. So I think the government at that point in time wanted to make sure that we were collaborating with them. The way forward is about a public-private partnership. To my mind, nobody in today's world knows all the answers. Okay, for example, even with vaccines, all along the vaccine technology. So GSK is the world's largest vaccine manufacturer as we speak. But today you're finding Moderna, which is a different form of a vaccine, never before applied. So nobody has all the answers, right? Once we create a kind of a digital platform, the way forward is to find islands of excellence and partner with certain so-called players who can bring in their credibility and their knowledge and their prowess basis your requirement. To my mind, that is where the focus should be. So, for example, whether it's for clinical trials, whether it's for innovation-led R&D, there is a lot of opportunity, but the underlying flavor is look at it from a public-private partnership, whether it's the academic partnership or it's a government partnership. There is an enormous opportunity because you're seeing that already India is now the technology provider to the world. Your TCSs, your Cognizant, your Infosys, etc. I clearly see that as an opportunity, the next wave, in terms of how we can show the world that healthcare is largely from India, and through partnerships with select players, you can actually take it to the next level.
Great. Thanks, Ransom. We heard you talking about this is some of the unforeseen challenges what you experienced throughout this journey, right? Like you mentioned the solution that it did, but any like unforeseen challenges that you faced while providing these solutions, to the people in with governments or with communities, given that the situation was so evolving, like Svetlana mentioned before.
Yeah, no, I think there is this common saying, the first rule in crisis is that there are no rules. So what we did is we actually crossed the river by feeling the stones. And we kind of, formed a team who were experts in the areas that, mattered to us. So, for example, whether it's employee healthcare, whether it's medical, whether it's health and safety, whether it's environment, whether it's communications, whether it's government. So there was a core team. And basis that, every 24 hours, you would kind of take one, you cross the river and kind of make sure that you're, just to give an example, there were 4,500 notifications and circulars from the center and state that were issued in the first 3 months. Now you divide that by 90 days, which means 45 circulars are issued every day, and they're in different languages, right? Leave alone interpretation, understanding, comprehending, implementing it so that you are not on the wrong side of the law. That itself was a full-time job till we kind of had some sense into this madness. Whether we can get our people on the field, can the guys go, can we manufacture, can this happen? So 45 circulars to make that simple. So we actually sounded like real big cowboys. This crack team, we called it as the incident management team. Although in our hearts, our tummies were kind of rumbling, saying, is this the right decision? But, we sounded very confident. We would kind of face up to the whole people, the entire organization of around 8,000 odd colleagues, and tell them that, guys, we have all the answers. Please reach out to us. Don't jump to any conclusions, and keep that as a fountainhead of information. Because, it's a favorite pastime. Everybody is at home watching television, and then WhatsApp is also free. So they keep circulating all kinds of news, and they want to show one-upmanship. So our fact was that, please don't take any decision. Please fold up to a north, south, east, west kind of a continuum. These are the people who will bubble up, because there is also a set of rumors that somebody went into the field, this building, etc., etc. So we wanted to quell it. And as I said, we crossed the river by feeling the stones. Fortunately, we were lucky. We kind of came out unscathed, but it was in the early days, it was quite a lot of madness. Just interpreting it from, my interactions with the government, just from a supply of paracetamol, were like, consuming right through. Because they wanted to know what is your actual raw material packaging, because the Prime Minister's office was involved in this decision making. So if you know the government hierarchy, it's the Health Ministry, DOP, Chemicals and Fertilizers, your Drugs Controller General, etc. All of them folding up and saying, get all the manufacturers on board. I want day-to-day production of data. At the same time, our guys don't land up in the factory because their building has been sealed. So it was kind of a mayhem, but I think it was coordinated madness. Fortunately, we sailed through. And the learning for me was to stay calm and stay coordinated. I think the fact is that if you have one set of person who's taking that decision from a company standpoint, whether it's contribution. So, for example, even with the Maharashtra government, because when you hear a name like GSK, they think we have hundreds of crores of rupees just lying next door. So the moment they call us, 100 crores will suddenly be transferred and we can adopt all of that. But the fact is that given you're a multinational company, you have to sign up for a host of regulations. We have to tie up that with our compliance and, ABAC policies. Global has to be approving it. Is that a matching grant? But for them in the pandemic, they want a swift, speedy response. So whether it's the Maharashtra Health State Minister or the Drug Controller General, actually making them understand that. And then also telling them that if I sign a contract with you, you are certain clauses, you need to report back to me in terms of utilization. Now, God help you, because if you get a utilization certificate from the government, that itself is a big task. So then we need to take certain provisions. So those are pieces that we managed. I think the intent was important. The intent was trying to tell them, what are the pillars and how we can help you and what are our limitations. To my mind, that is something that works for us.
Right. No, thanks, Ransom. So, Sakina, coming to you, like, same question, right? What were these, the unforeseen challenges that you faced, and how did, the entire Philips team and you guys responded to it?
I think we were sailing in the same boat as Ransom said. It was no different for a lot of people. So a lot of people were like taken unawares in the first few months. We had to really find our feet on the ground and see how things would work. Supply chain, definitely, as he shared already, that it was a big challenge because supply chain was impacted. We wanted to contribute our equipment to people, but because of the supply chain thing, a lot of things got impacted. We had to really look from an internal perspective, then go external, because it wasn't a challenge which is external. It was first a challenge that you have to deal with internally and looking at your welfare of your employees, health of your employees, your systems that all of a sudden have come to a halt. And then you started building on it. What is the best way to do it? I think we did it a little slightly less challenging for us because I think we had those systems in place, not because of a certain disaster or something, but because Philips operates in a more flexible way. For internal, it was easy because we have that flexible policy of working from home. We had it earlier also. So that kind of was a little smoother than I would say for a lot of other organizations. But the other challenge which came into fold internally was health and safety and also the mental health of everyone, not only our employees, but other stakeholders that we were working with every day in and out. So these challenges were definitely one that were first managed, and then we started looking at business challenges and also the challenge that we used to have under our social development setup. Lockdown obviously didn't help. Lockdown because it just happened suddenly, and all of a sudden we were not able to go to the communities, we were not able to go to the field, we were not able to do a lot of stuff that we could ideally have done if we had been prepared for it. But I think this first few months were a little difficult. Gradually, we started setting up systems, not only by doing an internal consultation, but we got other stakeholders on board. We got our partners on board. We got our consultants on board and started discussing with them. What are the things that we can do in the community level? What are the things that we can look at in the current scenario? Because we couldn't keep sitting and not doing anything about it. So what is the best way to operate in the field in the best possible way where everybody's health and safety is maintained, but also at the same time, we're able to function pretty much on the same levels that we used to do earlier. I think 2 months down the line, we were back on track. We knew that what we were going to do, business was taking care of itself. CSR was taking care of itself. We had partners on board who we were in touch with. Why? Because they were more closer to the community and they really knew about what is happening at the community level. So we used to get feedbacks from them. And then we revised the entire situation and plans and work plans. We went from on-site to virtual, not only from an awareness perspective, but training happened through virtual mediums. We had reviews happening through virtual mediums. We stopped doing on-site. We started going online. I think to the level that we also started actually conversing at certain levels with the frontline healthcare workers through virtual mediums. We set up IVR systems where we were able to reach out to people. So that everything got into the challenges were overcome over time. We still, I completely voice what Svetlana said, that it's an evolving situation. So I don't say that we have done wonders. I'm just saying that we're just evolving with what is happening and what is changing on scenario. We're changing things and doing it as per the requirement and need. So looking at the need is very important for us. If there is a need, we would definitely want to be a part of it. If there is no need, then we will also like to look at locations where we want to go and look at what we can do in whatever capacity that we have and to change that. So I think I think more in terms of awareness, more in terms of building sustainable and responsible solutions for a larger good. That's definitely what we are working on currently.
Great. So coming to you, Svetlana, like something which, even right now is mentioned by Sakina, looking forward, what will be your own approach, to invest in building resilience in your communities, against such future disasters, if they happen?
Arnav, thanks for asking that question. But let me share with you that to me, personally, I think resilience is a much overused word. And, it's something like, people keep talking of the Mumbai spirit. Yeah, every time there's a disaster, they say, "Oh, the spirit of Mumbai," and it's almost like you're expecting some magic to happen and people to just bear it and go on. Having said that, I think one thing that all of us must acknowledge is that the pandemic has definitely taught us, all of us, whether it's us as Novartis or any other organization or us as individuals, that there is much that can happen remotely. So, and of course, enabled by technology. And that is something that, it has perhaps changed the world forever. Whether we will go back to who or what we were before the pandemic hit, only time will tell. However, the pandemic has certainly given us the opportunity to examine what we did right, what worked well, what didn't work so well, where we failed, where we could have done things differently or better. And I think it is in some time that we will need to sit and look back at this, do some deep introspection, and then come up with solutions where we think that which would perhaps, like you said, talk about resilience and where we could build resilience into the communities. Because we must remember that history is a great teacher, but we don't necessarily learn from history. Yeah, I mean, otherwise we as mankind wouldn't keep repeating the same mistakes we do. So hopefully we will, as a community, emerge richer and better through this pandemic. And I think for now, we should really follow what the authorities say, what the health authorities say, wash our hands, maintain social distancing, and go out only if you need to, and hope that we stay safe to face the future disasters.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But from your CSR investment perspective, do you see any change in your approach, or you think you'll, like you said, you'll continue to evolve and learn, and then come up with?
Honestly, I don't see a change in approach. Okay, because our CSR projects, I think we do CSR projects that are for the long term, the medium to long term. They're not short term projects. So if, for example, if I could share that we do work in the leprosy area, I mean, is that going to change because of the pandemic? Certainly not. Okay. And in fact, we're investing more in that area because we feel that, these are things that we would like to see. That disease made history. So we will continue our efforts in that area. To that extent, I don't see a change taking place in our CSR spends simply because of the pandemic. No, this year, of course, there has been, increased focus on addressing the pandemic, but I don't see that going forward into the future, for example. And I think that we will continue doing what we have been doing, and will it change? Only time will tell.
Fair. So coming back to you, Ransom, from what kind of, we spoke about the government's role and being so important, right? So what kind of policy changes, or support from the government do you think will it be required, to increase the investment in the healthcare space, which is roughly at about 1.5, 1.6% of GDP, which, like you mentioned before, is also very low compared to other countries, including China. So, it would be great to hear your perspectives on this.
Yeah, so I think spend is just one indicator of healthcare. I mean, if you look at US, they spend close to 20%, 19, 20 trillion dollars. Our economy is struggling at 2.6 and 3 trillion, depending on which data you take. And they spend 19 to 20 trillion dollars every year. And this year, of course, they've pumped in a huge amount of money, so that's going to go further. So I definitely don't see an immediate direct link with the spending. And if you look at whether the average life expectancy or the healthcare parameters in the US are the best in the world because they have the highest spend, the answer to that is no. So I think I would actually look for accountability, transparency, and efficiency, and that all of that can happen when you have a platform like digital. I mean, and that will come when you get a certain incentive and a reward. I think, look at it from, just last week, I got a ticket because my driver was speeding the car. I had to pay 1,000 rupees. Now that is a demotivator for my driver when he hits the Worli Sea face, not to hit the pedal. because he knows that it'll be deducted from his salary. So I think there should be these rewards and incentive mechanisms to make. And I think when it comes all together, when everything, so today, like I said, when I have a digital health card, which I am safe to kind of make sure that it's not being misused, I feel comfortable, as a tax-paying citizen. Now, of course, it means different things to different people. I think start with at least with this and show the proof of the pudding. But I definitely feel what COVID has taught us is a higher digital appetite. I mean, I for a month actually, almost 2 months, I didn't spend a single rupee. And when I went out and somebody asked me to spare, give money, I was all doing entire payment transactions was happening. It didn't mean that I did not spend any money. The entire payment was happening either through internet banking or through, a Paytm or any of the activities. So I think that, to my mind, so much so that even doctors today, the reticence that a doctor had to do a Zoom call. My mother is diabetic, and 10 days ago, I did a first Zoom call with my mom to make sure that the doctors, so there is going to be more and more of this. But I think still the capturing of that data, pooling together, having some kind of a code, you are seeing some bit of activity happening with the NMC. So, for example, there's a new National Medical Council that has got institutionalized, and therefore right from the curriculum pieces and also the cost. So if you look at the cost, they were paying a measly amount of 80,000 rupees. I think the cost of medical is actually gone up to 8 lakhs to 10 lakhs. Personally, I believe that's the right thing to do, because most of these people who study in these schools actually go and work in the US or some other country. So they are an affording population. But we need to find mechanisms to straddle both ends of the spectrum, the rural as well as the urban. But to my mind, the game changer is to leapfrog and do digital. And I think there are enormous possibilities when that, in fact, all my government interactions, I mean, until this date, I mean, I haven't seen, even we have a new pharma secretary who joined, even up until 3 days ago, she has interacted and is so willingly interacting with just 9-10 CEOs, right? Because they have introduced a PLI scheme. So they are more than willing today to make it as transparent and do this kind of a dialogue. So if the governments are willing to do that, I think the hospitals need to kind of create an infrastructure and see how we can pull it in. It will take time. I feel optimistic, but it requires a Nandan Nilekani to kind of be, for healthcare specifically, to come up and say, what, I'm going to do this for 1 billion plus people. When that happens, that to my mind will be a big game changer. Great.
No, totally agree with you. I think, governments and everyone's really adopted digital and the virtual way of working. And we'll see to what we go back to, when in the new normal, which people keep on speaking about. So, we have I think last 5-10 minutes. So I just want to close out by asking, a rapid fire quick question. So the question will be what is your vision for a post-COVID-19 world? And it will be great if you can answer this question in just one sentence, and maybe we can start in the reverse alphabetical order. So Svetlana, then Sakina, and then Ransom.
I'd look for a more empathetic world.
Sakina?
Well, I look for more digitally and technologically enabled world, because that's the need of the hour.
I would say the world of possibilities. To my mind, the world has so much enormous untapped possibilities. I mean, the fact is, the moment you realize that you can actually do a gene mapping, through CRISPR, you realize what is your disposition. So we ain't seen anything yet. With health tech just knocking at the door, the world is full of possibilities. Stay tuned for more.
Thanks so much. So what I'm hearing from you is optimism all around. Which is great, and empathy, digital, and a world full of possibilities, as we go forward. So thanks a lot, to all the panelists for taking out the time and for this very illuminating discussion. I just want to summarize, by outlining that, none of us can actually address the gaps, alone. We all mentioned that working closely with the government, with our partners, the NGOs, and the communities, who are most critical. And we need to make sure that, everyone join hands to reimagine, healthcare and build performance oriented healthcare systems. At the Gates Foundation, we certainly believe, and I think all of your also partners in that are impatient optimists. And I certainly believe that every crisis, provides an opportunity. And I'm hopeful that, from an India perspective and at our country, we'll certainly lap up this opportunity, to further build upon the healthcare performance and, look at reimagining our healthcare systems, primarily to ensure that, the 4As, which the three of you mentioned, affordability, accessibility, availability, and accountability. So thanks a lot for everyone to join. Stay safe and take care.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Arnab.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.